already started the recording?
All right, it's going to be both recording us and going live as soon as the download to YouTube kick on. So pretend you're on already.
Okay.
Both recording us and going live as soon as the download to YouTube kick on. So pretend you're on already.
Okay.
Both recording us and going live as soon as the download to YouTube kick on. So pretend you're on already. All right, we are on. I'm looking for it to launch my screen. There we go. All right. All right, we are on. Well, good morning, good afternoon, actually, late afternoon. We are coming on today, and let me try to get rid of some of this feedback I have going on here. All right, that's a little better. We're coming on. I'm staying Archie, and I'm on with LaToya Love. We are the
Hello.
host of Mental Balance, which is a broadcast that really um, focuses a lot on what to do and how to manage our the challenges that we face from a mental perspective. You know, how do I stay balanced mentally? And when we first started the show, it was before Coroniville kicked in, so we had no idea that we would really be talking a lot about the issues of coronavirus and other kinds of things and what they do to us. And so we're doing some extra segments here on our YouTube channel, and just to kind of talk about where people might be and what things we might consider when we think about those who are facing corona and all those things that get the best of us. And so let's start the conversation. They're really kind of talking about, um, I mean, what is it? What are some of the challenges that people are having right now? We talked a little bit about collective vulnerability. We talked about collective grief last time. But what does it mean to be vulnerable as a nation or as a world?
hmm
What does it feel like?
I think well, vulnerability should probably be defined so like people understand like what we mean by being vulnerable. So like it's kind of like um you don't have anywhere to you're open. You are um
Exposed.
exposed. I was trying to look for
Mhm.
another word. You're exposed. And I think one thing that I found interesting with what we have going on within Coronaville is that normally there's at least somebody that kind of knows what's going on. You can be like, well, but the CDC or some doctor, but literally it's like there's no really an expert per se. Some people may know a little bit more than others just because they know a little bit more about infectious disease. But
Excuse me. Feedback.
Oh, go ahead.
but there's really everybody is on the same level of that, and so that in and of itself might cause people to feel more vulnerable because then they have to say I don't know, or in that state of not in control. So just a state of not in control will cause people to be vulnerable.
When you're vulnerable, then that means that the safeguards that you had on to make you feel safe and secure are
Mm-hmm.
now gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, there's a sense of uncertainty. It's kind of like, I've always looked at animals like the deer, who has no real safety net and who's just out there on a regular basis. I've always wondered, what would it be like to have no safeguards, no safety net, nothing to lean back on when it comes to kind of dealing with issues that you're unsure about that could be harmful to you. And I think that many of us, what I see here often is many people start looking for the best explanations they can come up with.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they're looking to the internet, and you recognize the internet is just you in the mirror. I mean,
Right.
it's another you that's out there trying to figure it out. Some people are just courageous enough to throw out their antidote to begin
Yeah.
to say, here's
On Google.
right, yeah. And so, and then you're right, get a number of things off Google, get a number of things that people talk about, and then they present it as fact.
Right.
So there's some folks who are, the Bible talks about us being thrown to and fro by every wind of doctrine.
Hmm.
I think it includes this kind of stuff where everything that's happening is pushing me one way to the other, and I'm consistently trying to figure out how to make this thing work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I tell you what's interesting, vulnerability has a hierarchy. That means that there's a hierarchy of vulnerability. So I want to share a little bit, if you were to look at the screen, um, about what that hierarchy kind of looks like. Um, and so vulnerability really kind of starts off when you feel vulnerable within yourself. Like internally, I don't have enough to be able to keep myself safe.
Hmm.
And so we've talked about the triune brain before. So
Hmm.
your reptilian brain takes over and your emotional stability is shaken a little bit and your thought pattern is influenced along the way. So you have all those things beginning to take place. So within yourself, you have this sense of vulnerability that you feel that feels uncomfortable. Now, some of us have those, we call them low self-esteem and insecurity and all those different kinds of things. And what that really is vulnerability within the self. The second level of vulnerability is vulnerability with a trusted person, with the most trusted person. That means if I always trust my mom's going to be here for me, and then I lose my mom, then all of a sudden now I feel very vulnerable because I have no one to run to, and that's connected to your attachment figure. I know where to run to, and I feel the thing that made the world safe is now gone. So there's an internal feeling that feels very uncomfortable there. The third thing is vulnerability with a group of people, and that vulnerability with a group of trusted people are like my family. I mean, not just my mom, that one person, but my whole family, my community, the group I hang out with. You've seen groups that have left their nest together as singing groups or whatever, and then they get out there, and then when the thing falls apart, they're kind of lost and vulnerable out there. Some people, when families dissipate, then you feel vulnerable in that particular case. Can we go on to the next level? You want to comment?
I mean, I just kind of look at this all like a blanket, and then you all taking off like different levels of like a blanket. Like if you're not comfortable within yourself, so then once you get that level of comfort, or I hate using comfort, but once you get that level of safety, I guess you can be like, all right, I can take this off now. And
then,
then
right, yeah.
yeah, then you can take this off. All right, I can take this off. But I don't know how safe we all get. Of course, there's a lot of things that are contributed to safety. So as I'm looking at the what do we leave off on community?
The community, yeah. Let's go ahead to community.
Yeah.
So community that means that I can walk out my front door and feel okay. I can connect. I can go to the grocery store and I feel okay. I can do some of the basic things that allow me to move away from my attachment world and begin to spend some time in the places that I go to the most and feel okay with that.
Right.
The next one is the wider community, which kind of gets into things that control my destiny, like government.
Okay, because I was like, what's the wider community?
Yeah, the wider community. The wider community really just goes to a more structured community. The other one is kind of much more random. So you go to that community, and then within the world. I mean, if the world does not have a place of safety for me, then that becomes a different level of vulnerability. So now the way the hierarchy works is you must have, like, you cannot have safety in the world if
If you don't
you're
have
not
anything yourself.
vulnerable within yourself. In
Right.
fact, you can't even have safety within a trusted person if you feel
You don't feel vulnerable.
Not vulnerable within yourself.
Right.
I mean, if you feel
Right.
over vulnerable within yourself. So living in that vulnerability and being able to set boundaries so that you feel comfortable where you're at in safety kind of keeps you away from the vulnerability. So now we have catapulted in a couple of months from probably somewhere in the bottom two.
Right.
Trying to be
Because
cool
now
myself.
everything is,
So now we have catapulted without dealing with the transition into a place where our world now is vulnerable.
Right.
And so for us who are Christians, our default is to God, who is bigger than the world. So there's another space where you can say, when the world is when I'm unsure in the world, and the world cannot guarantee me safety, then that's when we face. When you see, we see movies like, Independence Day, and all those movies where somebody on the outside
Independence Day.
Yeah, and then the whole world comes together to keep them to attack what's making the world vulnerable.
Right.
In this case, they're calling it, I think our government is calling it, an invisible
enemy.
Yeah. So what they're trying to do is trying to figure out how the world can get together and figure out
and combat this
guy. Now here's the challenge though. Most of the time when the world has an enemy, or at least most of the world, a coalition has an enemy, then some of the world is united.
Right.
But in this case, the world was already disbarred and individualized, mostly because of the United States. But we kind of broke. We kind of broke every covenant,
right,
with everybody who were our friends, and so now when this need,
that's a different webinar.
when there's a different need, the need for all of us to be together came upon us. We really we were not unaware of how to deal with this, and so now we're blaming each other. We're doing what happens when people see the enemy as each other rather than see the outside enemy.
Right. So how would you relate to, because as I'm looking at this, and I come from a trauma background, and I think we both obviously, and when I say background, I mean clinically, with working with people who have experienced trauma. When you experience a trauma and it kind of shakes this whole hierarchy up, so you could have had this all in order, and then that all gets shaken up from like something traumatic that happened to you, and now you don't know where to place your world anymore, or this whole little hierarchy is messed up. So like Coroniville kind of happened to us all. So the world is like all shaken up, and so like it's kind of like, so now we have to start within ourselves to figure out, okay, so like how do we I don't want to say rebuild, but I guess recognize, the impact. I don't know. So I think every day I recognize more of an impact that Coronaville, that's what we're gonna call it. We coined it. I think I recognize every day more of what Coronaville has impacted my life. I'm like, dang, I can't, okay. And it could be something as large as, so I'm supposed to get this treatment, but I can't get this treatment because that's needed, but my doctor's like, well, I don't want to put you on this IV because that will make you more susceptible to a virus. And then you have to go to the hospital. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to give you the oral form of the drug, but that might not be as potent. So it's like, okay, so I just have to figure out how to deal with this symptom, so every day, you just kind of figure out more of what's shaking in that vulnerability. So then now I have to I was just talking to one of my friends, and I have to figure out like, okay, how do I articulate this new symptom to somebody so that they can help me, versus like, no, I'll just deal with it on my own. It's like, can't do that, so it's like every day you figure out something new. So I don't know, I guess I'm like, since you have to start from the bottom up, since you have to be safe within yourself, I guess I'm kind of like, I guess, how do you begin to recognize the vulnerability in yourself first?
Well, I mean, I think in this particular
Especially in
case,
our independent
Mhm.
culture we have.
Mhm.
You know, I don't know.
I think that, there's a couple of models that's been tested to give us a picture of things that you need to pay attention to when it comes to your own safety and when it comes to feeling secure. So let's talk about that first. And then I want to save a little time at the end to talk about uh, because I think everything's biblical. So that means there's a biblical framework that we're dealing with somewhere
Mhm.
in here. And so I want to look at times where God made a decision to allow the world to experience the consequences of his own decisions. Now, what people will say is, "Are you saying that this is a wrath of God?" Well, I mean, we'll talk about that in just a moment. But let's talk about kind of this dynamic of, what do I look like, and how do I really get to be in a place of security? Now, self-actualization is a desire to become the most that I can be, which is at the top of Maslow's
Hierarchy of needs.
hierarchy of needs, right? So below that is respect for self-esteem, recognition of status, and those kinds of things that will make us feel functional in
Mhm.
the daily life um, without feeling needy. I mean, there's some results of not having either one of those. Then you have below that, and I'm going from the top down here. Then you have below that love and belonging, which friendship, intimacy, family. I mean, my ability to relate and connect to other people, and to feel comfortable that I'm not alone in the world, but I'm connected to someone else. Sometimes when you have a challenge and you're the only one that have suffered that, then your need is to connect with somebody else who at least understands where you're coming from. And then you have safety needs, where I have employment and resources and health and property and personal security. Those kind of things come next. Now, I would think that right now, that's where we're at. Now, most of us are so scared of getting down to that last one
Mhm. Yes.
that
Yep.
we went out and purchased all the toilet paper we could. We went out and purchased all the bottled water shelves on different. I mean, all these things we went out and we did whatever we could, whatever resources we
Mhm.
had,
So we are
because
not at the
I
physiological
fear,
need
yeah,
space.
I don't want to get down to
Yeah.
that last thing.
Because that's a scary place.
Right.
You know? So like right now, nobody's worried about like, you know what, I want to do a seminar on, like how to, like nobody's worried about
Yeah,
me
the love and the
self-actualizing.
friendship and belonging thing
Yeah,
is
like
not,
no, I ain't worried about my
not there.
self-esteem right now in the sense of
Right.
that. Like I'm trying to figure out
Now,
how I'm
what that does is it means that the Coroniville has now creeped into a lot of people's houses
because
because of patience with each other,
right,
tolerance with the children, even the treatment of pets is going to change drastically whenever
right.
like when you were way up there in the self-esteem, then you were proud and you were okay and you felt safe. Matter of fact, that means your love and belonging and intimacy, you could enjoy it and experience it. But when you get
Right.
down below love and intimacy, then that means you've
Hmm.
lost the ability to effectively enjoy those times in your life.
Right. And I mean, it's even showing with because if that's how you relate to like it's gonna start clashing. So if that's how you relate to, okay, I have to have my nails done and I have to have my hair done
Mhm.
and I have to X, Y, and Z, and all that's cut off right now,
Mhm.
baby.
And really, most of
So
those are up in the green zone.
right. But what I'm saying
Beauty
is
and all that kind of stuff is up in the green zone. And so
that's
there's a lot
gone
of people who are going to have natural hair involuntarily.
involuntarily. But the problem is that's gonna match up against
They're
that's
real
gonna
nails. They're
right,
real.
that's gonna mash up against some in that vulnerability place is what I'm trying to tell you. That's what
Well,
I'm also thinking about that vulnerability dyad.
I think that it is a sense of vulnerability because it affects your self-esteem.
Correct. And
So, but
see,
it's
you're
still
not a woman. See, you're not a woman, and you don't understand how connected that is for some.
I understand it's significant. I am also, I have to follow the science. And so my gender cannot overrule the science.
Okay.
And so the science basically tells me that when people, like, let's suppose you got extra money and you good, even if you had to stretch a little bit, adjust your budget, then you can get all those extra things done in the green zone.
Right.
However, if your money get really tight and you barely can pay the rent and all that kind of stuff, then you start doing your hair at home and painting your own nails, and you start.
I don't think you understand.
I'm telling you,
that
as a clinician, I'm only speaking as a clinician, not as a man.
I'm just going to interrupt you for 2 seconds because why I said it interrupts the vulnerability, because I know people. I do, like, I'm a secretary for many. Okay. So there are still people who are trying to get their nails and hair done. And it doesn't matter if they just lost their job. Like, they have to have
I'm talking about
their nails and hair. I don't care if I just lost my job. I'm going to figure out how to get my nails done, even though it's irresponsible. Yes, it's not.
Let me ask a question.
I'm just saying.
If they're on the brink of getting into the dark red, like they about to put us out, the eviction's coming, the truck's outside, I need to get my nails done.
No, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that
now
it's gonna bump up against some stuff. I know some people,
because what I'm doing is showing that I think it's in the green. So if they were in a situation where the love of their life was, they're in the love and belonging stage, they're about to lose connection with the people that they love the most. You're saying at that particular point, they'd be like, you know what? I know we can't go visit our loved one, but I'm going to the hair shop.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, so I think the esteem issue is there, and it's very important. Everything on this list is important, but our natural reactions, no matter how significant those things in the green are, our natural reactions, because we move away from our cognitive thinking, and we're now moving down towards our reptilian brain. So we're in the limbic system, we're at different places. If you're about to lose your loved ones, I've seen, if you do the hospital visits, that when people are in that degree of distress, they ain't going to because I've been there. They ain't going to the hair shop. And so it's important. So I don't want to take that away. I think you're exactly right. It's a part of what makes us feel significant. And if you leave that out, then that is also a painful element. It's also a reminder that I'm important. It's giving something to yourself. And so I think those things are significantly important on the hierarchy scale. Then you can be, their vulnerability level might be, and let's talk about because we're talking about vulnerability. If we talk about the vulnerability level, wait a minute, I'm sorry. I think you can be at the vulnerability level where you trust people within your community and go get your hair done. I think you can trust a few people and go get your hair done. I think when you get to the point where your most trusted person, when that gets shaky, then it's a choice. It's according to whether you're getting your hair done is because of your self-esteem or whether it is because it's pampering self. Because you might need some pampering if your life mate is tripping.
Okay.
So I need to go do something to myself. But the vulnerability level is, and so I guess I would say that those kinds of stuff, grooming, like some people work out and some people, they're different things. Some people eat. I mean, there are different things that people do. You can fit into that category of self-grooming. But I think in the hierarchy that's in the green zone, even if it is in a different place and the vulnerability with different people.
Right.
All right. So before our time moves out, we're 5 minutes away from being done. I want to kind of bring up some issues that we don't talk a lot about. Sometimes we talk about, it might be talked about. I'm just off of Facebook right now during Lent. And so therefore, I don't know what y'all talking about.
Me too.
But I think there's been a number of times when you think about the death angel, first time he was introduced as we know him in fully by name is in Genesis. God was upset because he could not be worshiped. And he had blessed Egypt in many different ways. One of them was with Joseph, who led them to a degree of prosperity and a lot of other things that were taking place there. They had actually bought into the system of God that God had put in place for Israel. And they were kind of living out that system because they had an Israelite leader who was there kind of running the show. After he died, they still knew a lot of those things, but there came a point where Israel would no longer desire, even though they lived in Egypt, they were no longer allowed to worship God. And God did not like not being worshiped. And so therefore, he took action and sent Moses to deliver the people. When Moses went to deliver the people, then there was a resistance, governmental resistance. And what God decided to do was bring a number of consequences against the resistance. And all of those consequences were consequences of nature. The most devastating one was whatever was in the death angel's presence, then as it overshadowed, people died. And the people who were dying was the firstborn of everyone who was there. But he told Israel is that if the blood of Christ is above your household, and if you're in that household, then then the death angel will pass by. Okay, so it feels like that the death angel is sweeping across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever they felt like then, and they did various things in different households. Many of them sang praises to God because they knew that's what God was missing. And so if we were in their shoes, we would probably feel like this. And so the question is, what are you doing in your house? What are you doing as an individual? Like, if I know that the consequences of not doing what God wants impacts me, then it seems like in my house, I would make adjustments to make sure I'm doing what God wants. Another time when we see that happening is, it's a similar situation, but the angels went walking into Sodom and Gomorrah. And there was a negotiation that took place, and God said, oh yeah, I'm going to destroy the city because the city's bad, and the stench of the city's sin has gotten up to me. However, I will spare it if there's enough righteous people to change it. And so he gave them an opportunity to demonstrate enough righteous people. And it really got down to give me 10 good folk. And I can use 10 people to change that whole city around. But if I can't find 10, then y'all better get out of there. And they couldn't find 10. So therefore, they had to get out of there. Now they had somewhere to run. So my second question would be, right now in your reach, your community, broader community, or even immediate community, is there at least 10 righteous people that can appeal to God so that God will say, you know what, I'm gonna salvage some people, a remnant out of this. Another situation came where Israel was in the wilderness, and God came along and said, when they worshiped the calf instead of him, I'm just gonna wipe these people out and start all over again. And so he was gonna start all over again with Moses and Zipporah. And Moses said, man, if you do that, then you're gonna look bad because everybody's gonna say you did this, whatever. And then God said, okay, well, here's the deal. I'm still gonna wipe the people out, but I do it over an extended period of time. So 40 years, these folks died in the wilderness. It feels like we're in one of those scenarios. Now, if you couple that with the fact that what will happen after all of this is done is that the world will be in a situation like the Bible describes in Revelation in the tribulation period. And so, and we don't have time to we'll do some Bible or whatever. We don't have time to spell that out. But the end result, no matter who lives or who dies, the end result will be every adjustment that we're making leads us to that dynamic. The need to understand what people are individually, put a chip in you. To need to be able to have higher connections. We're moving to 5G and some other kinds of things. So maybe we move higher connections where self-identification and tracking of people and all that kind of stuff is much more in place, because what we found out is those 3,000 people they let off their first boat, a large percentage of them became infected. But what happened is they let them off in the airport. They all went on airport planes, got in their connected flight, infected people on those planes landed. Some of them had 3 connections before they got home, and then got home and found out that they had the virus. That means you probably infected people on, and those people went home then and infected folks that they had, went to work, they didn't know. And so you just had all of this dynamic happening. So the solution is we need to be able to track a person.
The people. Yep.
Where to go. The other thing is the government is taking control of some of the basic things that are needed for survival. And so as the basic things that are needed for survival are controlled by the government, then that means if you don't have a chip, then you can't buy. So I'm saying that even if the world don't do it right away.
You're basically saying, wake up. That's what you're saying.
We're going to be in position to do everything that the Bible talked about. Now, there's a lot of folks out there who just, I don't believe the Bible.
That's cool. But
it just happens that everything gets predicted, including the internet and everything else that we knew nothing about, has come true. Even the falling away of the church by a generation or two. And so even if you don't believe it as a book that you would say, God, I need to choose you, you should at least believe its historical accuracy to the degree where you will investigate. So what we want you to do is recognize that in every case, there's always been some kind of blood on the outside of your house, some kind of element that says that the blood of Christ is what I lean on for security.
Amen.
So if you have within yourself this sense of doubt and fear and all that stuff, I'm saying that give it a shot. I mean, we're in this stage of vulnerability where the world's not safe right now. You got to reach out bigger than the world to find the answer.
You're quarantined. Let's well check.
And reaching out bigger than the world is not, you ain't bigger than the world, your race ain't bigger than the world, blackness, your religion's not even bigger than the world. The only thing bigger than the world is God.
Yeah. Go check some stuff out. We quarantined, you know what I'm saying? Do some reading.
I would just say, if there's nothing else that offers the sense of security that meets up with that song that says he's got the whole world in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, if you are in his hand, you could be safe. If you're not in his hand, then death angel cometh. And the question is whether or not you can, and you might survive it. But I'm just saying that right now, the vulnerability that you experience could be very, very heavy.
Yeah.
You don't have an outlet. Next time we'll talk about some techniques you can do, some relaxation things you can do, some other kinds of things you can do, and some home.
Can we talk about yoga?
We can talk about yoga. I might get a yoga person to come in and talk with us.
Okay.
But that sense of
they do yoga.
Sense of peace that you have to look for within yourself, if you can't find it outside of yourself, is really, really important. All right. So we appreciate you jumping us. This is kind of a Corona update, talking about Coroniville. And
Coroniville, Mental Balance Coroniville edition.
We'll kick in to just kind of let you know that we're concerned, and whatever things we can bring to bear, then we're bringing to bear. I'm Dr. Stan Archie,
LaToya Love,
and we're
LPC.
from Mental Balance. It's on Praise 95 at 12 o'clock every Saturday. So join the conversation.